The coffee was still brewing when my phone lit up. 6:47 in the morning. Tuesday. The kind of quiet Tuesday where the only sound in the house is the coffee maker finishing its cycle, and the ceiling fan clicking faintly overhead. I was standing at the kitchen counter in my pajamas, barefoot on the tile, scrolling through nothing in particular. The way you do when your brain hasn't fully loaded yet and the day hasn't asked anything of you. My mother's name on the screen didn't alarm me. She called most mornings. Sometimes twice. That was just how it was with us. A rhythm I'd accepted so long ago I'd stopped noticing the weight of it. I picked up on the second ring, tucked the phone between my ear and shoulder, and reached for a mug. Beta, good morning. How are you? How's Jake? We're good, Mom. What's up? There was a pause. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But I've known my mother for 34 years and I know what her pauses mean. That particular pause, the one where she exhales just slightly through her nose before speaking, means she's about to tell me something she's already decided. Not ask. Well, we talked to Daniel last night. Okay. He's really struggling, Sarah. The loan he took, you know, the one from his friend Khalid's cousin, it's $14,000 now with the interest. And Khalid's family is getting impatient. They've been calling your father. That's a lot of money, Mom. It is. It is, yes. Another pause. Shorter this time. So we told him not to worry. We told him you would handle it. I stopped reaching for the mug. I stood completely still with my arm halfway extended over the counter and I just stopped. The coffee maker beeped once behind me. The ceiling fan kept clicking. The morning kept being ordinary. And my mother kept talking, filling in the details the way she always does, the timeline and the logistics and the reassurances. Her voice warm and practical and completely unbothered, because in her mind the hard part was already over. She'd found the solution. She'd already told Daniel. The only remaining formality was informing me. We figured you could just wire it directly. I'll send you Khalid's cousin's account number. Your father thinks before the end of the month would be good. Give Daniel some breathing room. Mom. And you know how these informal loans get. It's not like a bank, people start talking. Mom. You stop. I never agreed to this. Silence. Real silence this time. The kind that has texture to it. And then softly, almost gently, in a tone that somehow managed to be both tender and completely immovable. But Beta, who else is there? I want you to stop right there with me for a second. Because if you've ever been the responsible one in your family, the one who moved away, built something, answered every call, sent money without being asked, and still somehow ended up feeling like you were failing them, then you know exactly what those 5 words did to me. Who else is there? Not, can you help? Not, we know this is a lot to ask. Not even. We're sorry we didn't talk to you first. Just who else is there? As if my bank account were a shared family resource that I happened to be holding on everyone's behalf. As if the life Jake and I had built in Dallas, the mortgage, the savings plan, the future we'd been quietly assembling for 3 years. As if all of that was simply the infrastructure for everyone else's emergencies. I had been standing at that counter for what felt like a long time when I became aware of something. Presence behind me. I don't know exactly when Jake had come downstairs. He moves quietly for a tall man, always has. Socked feet on hardwood, unhurried, never announces himself. I turned around and he was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, in his gray t-shirt and flannel pants, holding his own mug that he'd apparently already filled from the second coffee maker we keep in his home office. He was looking at me. Not at his phone. Not at the window. Me. And from the particular stillness in his face. Jake has this quality where his expression doesn't betray much, but his stillness tells you everything. I understood immediately that he had heard enough. Not everything. Maybe not the beginning. But enough. He heard, $14,000. He heard, we told him you would handle it. He heard, who else is there? I held eye contact with him for exactly 1 second, and then I turned back to the window and said to my mother, quietly, carefully, in the voice I use when I am not ready to have the full conversation yet, Mom, I have to go. I'll call you later. She started to say something. Probably okay, Beta, send me your thoughts or let me know what you decide. But I had already pulled the phone from my ear and set it face down on the counter. Jake didn't say anything right away. He walked to the counter, set his mug down next to mine, and leaned against the edge with his arms crossed. Not aggressive, not performing, just present, the way he gets when something matters. How long has this been happening, he asked. And that question, so calm, so surgical, so completely without accusation, broke something open in me that I had been carefully keeping shut for a very long time. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. I didn't answer Jake right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I suddenly understood that whatever I said next was going to make this real in a way it had never been before. As long as the pattern lived only inside me, inside my private accounting of every transfer, every loan, every quiet sacrifice, I could manage it. I could file it away and keep moving. But Jake was standing right there with his arms crossed and his coffee going cold and that question hanging in the air between us like smoke. How long has this been happening? Picked up my mug, took a sip, and I told him. Not everything. Not yet. But enough for that morning. Enough for him to understand that this phone call wasn't an incident. It was an installment. He listened without interrupting. That's one of the things I have always loved most about Jake. He doesn't interrupt. He waits until you're done, really done, and then he asks one question. Just one. That morning when I finished, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "It's your family, your choice. But if you say yes this time, I need you to choose who your real family is." I didn't respond. He nodded once, picked up his mug and walked back upstairs. And I stood there in my kitchen in Dallas on a Tuesday morning with the sun coming through the window and my coffee getting cold, and I understood, for the first time with absolute clarity, that something had just shifted. That I was standing at the edge of a decision that was not really about $14,000. It never had been. What I didn't know yet was what Jake was going to find in my own records, and what I was going to do about it. Let me tell you who I was before that Tuesday morning. Because none of what comes later makes sense without understanding what I'd spent 34 years becoming. My name is Sarah Mitchell. And on paper, I am exactly the kind of person my family likes to point to at dinner parties. I grew up in a mid-size house in Naperville, Illinois. The kind of suburb where every lawn is edged on Saturdays and the school district is the whole reason people move there. My father, Robert, was a mechanical engineer. Steady job, steady income. Not a man of many words but a man of strong opinions about how things should be done and who should do them. My mother, Carol, taught third grade for 22 years and ran our household the way she ran her classroom. With warmth, with structure, and with a very clear sense of who the capable students were and who needed extra handling. I was always the capable student. My brother Daniel is 5 years younger than me. He was the one who needed extra handling. Not because he was a bad person. I want to be careful about that because the story I'm telling you isn't really about Daniel being a villain. Daniel is just someone who was never asked to carry anything. From the time he was old enough to have responsibilities, there was always a reason he didn't have to. He was sensitive. He was still figuring things out. He'd had a hard semester. He was going through something. And I was fine. I was always fine. So the weight shifted, quietly and permanently, in my direction. I graduated high school with a 4.1 GPA. Earned a partial scholarship to the University of Illinois. Finished my bachelor's in accounting in 3.5 years because I was taking extra credits while also working 20 hours a week at the campus library. Got my master's in financial compliance from DePaul at 24. Passed my certification exams on the first attempt. Moved to Dallas at 26 for a position at a regional bank where I now spend my days reviewing transaction records, flagging irregularities, and tracing money through systems that most people find impenetrably complex. I trace money for a living. I find things people try to hide. I follow paper trails through 17 layers of documentation and I reconstruct exactly what happened and when and who knew about it. I want you to hold on to that detail. It matters more than it seems right now. I met Jake at 29. He was working in commercial real estate, acquisitions specifically, which meant he spent his days evaluating whether properties were worth what people claim they were worth. We met at a work event, one of those industry mixer things where everyone is slightly overdressed and holding a drink they don't really want, and he asked me what I did, and when I told him I reviewed compliance records, he said, completely sincerely, "That sounds like the kind of job where you're always the smartest person in the room and nobody thanks you for it." I married him 14 months later. We bought our house in Frisco, just north of Dallas, 3 years ago. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. A backyard with a covered patio that Jake built himself over one long October weekend. Our mortgage is $2,340 a month. We have a joint savings account, a shared investment portfolio, and a 5-year plan that we revisit every January with a spreadsheet Jake built and I maintain. We are not wealthy. We are stable. We worked very specifically and very deliberately to become stable, because neither of us came from money and we both understood, in our bones, what instability actually costs. That stability, that careful, deliberate, spreadsheet-maintained stability, is what my family had decided was available for redistribution. Here is what I need you to understand about how I functioned inside my family system. I was not asked to be the responsible one. I was simply never given the option not to be. Start small. It always starts small. The first time it happened, the first time I can point to and say that is where the pattern began. I was 19 years old and a freshman in college, and my mother called to tell me that Daniel needed new cleats for his travel soccer league and could I send $50 for my work-study check. I sent it. Of course I sent it. I was 19 and he was 14 and it was $50 and he was my little brother. I didn't know I was signing an invisible contract. By the time I was 23, the amounts had grown and the requests had a different texture. They weren't requests anymore exactly. They were announcements followed by logistics. "Sarah, we're going to need you to cover Daniel's car insurance this month. Just send it to the same account." Not "could you?" Not "would you be able to?" Just "we're going to need you to." And I did. Because the alternative, saying no, drawing a line, introducing friction into a family system that had been running smoothly on my compliance, felt at the time more costly than just sending the money. That is the trap, by the way. And if you've ever been in it, you know exactly what I mean. The trap isn't that your family is asking too much. The trap is that they've made saying yes feel cheaper than saying no. Every boundary has a tax. Every refusal comes with a withdrawal, of warmth, of approval, of the sense that you are still loved in the uncomplicated way you need to be loved. So you pay. You pay the actual money and you pay the emotional math and you tell yourself it's fine, you're fine, this is just what families do. You do this for years. And then one Tuesday morning your mother calls and tells you, completely casually, that she's already promised your money to someone else. I want to tell you something I've never said out loud to anyone except Jake. There was a version of me that almost wired that $14,000. Not because I thought it was right. Not because I had agreed to it. But because the path of least resistance, the one I had been walking my entire adult life, ran straight through compliance. I knew how to do it. I knew the wire transfer process. I knew the SWIFT codes. I could have done it in 11 minutes and then spent the next 6 months quietly resenting everyone involved, the way I always had before. That version of me was standing in that kitchen in her pajamas calculating the cost of the fight versus the cost of just sending the money. And then I turned around and saw Jake in the doorway. What Jake had heard that morning wasn't just one phone call. He'd been doing his own quiet math. And what he'd been adding up was something I hadn't let myself look at directly in years. That night, after dinner, after we'd both been careful and quiet with each other the way you are when something large is sitting between you at the table, Jake pushed his chair back and looked at me with the expression I've come to recognize as his "I've been thinking about this all day" face. "I want to see the records," he said. "What records?" "Every transfer. Every payment. Everything you've sent your family since we've been together." I looked at him. Sarah. His voice was steady. Not hard. Not angry. Just steady the way a foundation is steady. I'm not asking as a judgment. I'm asking because I think you've been carrying something you've never actually looked at the full weight of. And I think it's time we both looked at it. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I got up, went to my home office, opened my filing cabinet, the one I keep obsessively organized because I am, professionally and personally, a person who does not let paper trails get messy, and I pulled out a folder. I set it on the table in front of Jake. He opened it, and the expression on his face as he turned the first page told me that what I had normalized over years of quiet compliance looked very, very different when someone else was seeing it for the first time. I thought I knew what was in that folder. I was wrong about one thing. And that one thing was about to change everything. The folder was a manila envelope, letter-sized, about 3/4 of an inch thick. I had started keeping it 4 years ago. Not because I suspected anything, not because I was building a case, but because I am a compliance analyst and keeping records is as natural to me as breathing. Every transfer confirmation, every wire receipt, every text message screenshot where my mother or father outlined what was needed and when, every Venmo transaction, every Zelle payment, every Western Union receipt from the early years before we all had smartphones and apps. I kept them the way I keep everything. Organized, dated, labeled. I had just never sat down and added them all up. Jake did that. That night, at our kitchen table, with a legal pad and a pen. He went through the folder page by page. I sat across from him with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that went cold before I drank half of it, and I watched my husband read the last 6 years of my financial life with my family, and I watched his face do something I had never seen it do before. He didn't get angry. Jake doesn't perform anger. What he did instead was go very, very quiet. The particular quiet of someone who is doing arithmetic in their head and not liking what the numbers are producing. After 40 minutes, he set the pen down. $43,000, he said. Just that. No inflection. Just the number, placed on the table between us like an object. I had known it was a lot. I had not known it was that much. When you pay in installments, $800 here, $2,000 there, a $3,500 emergency in March, a $1,200 situation in November, the individual amounts feel manageable. They feel survivable. What you don't see until someone lays it all out on a legal pad is the shape of the whole thing. $43,000 over 6 years. None of it repaid. None of it. Not once, in any text, in any call, in any conversation, acknowledged as debt. But here is what I want to tell you about those 6 years. Because $43,000 is a number, and numbers are abstract, and I don't want this to be abstract. I want you to understand what that money actually looked like. What it felt like. What it cost in ways that don't show up on a legal pad. Let me tell you about 3 specific moments. Because these 3 moments are not the whole story, they are just the ones I keep coming back to. The ones that, when I replay them now, make the most sense as a sequence. As a pattern that was always there, waiting to be named. The first moment. The loan that became a gift. 3 years ago, in the spring, my father called me on a Saturday afternoon. This was unusual. My father is not a phone caller. He's an engineer. He communicates in person or in writing, and when he calls you on a weekend it means something has already gone wrong. Sarah, your brother needs help. He took a personal loan, $6,000, to cover some expenses, business-related, and the interest rate is not reasonable. If he doesn't pay it back in the next 30 days, the penalties are significant. What kind of business expenses? He was trying to start something. It didn't work out. I did not ask more questions. I should have. I wired $6,000 to Daniel's account the following Monday with one condition. I asked my father to treat it as a loan, to have Daniel send me $300 a month, and to put something in writing, even just a text message, acknowledging the amount and the repayment plan. My father said, "Of course, yes, absolutely." I received one payment. $300. In May of that year. After that, nothing. When I followed up in August, my mother told me Daniel had hit a rough patch. And could I please not add pressure right now because he was already stressed? When I followed up again in November, my father told me we should discuss it when everyone is together at Christmas. We spent Christmas together. It was not discussed. By the following spring, the $6,000 had simply dissolved, disappeared into the family atmosphere like it had never existed as a specific, documented, agreed-upon amount. And I understood, without anyone saying so directly, that following up further would make me the problem. That the money was gone, and the choice I had was whether to poison the holiday table over it or let it go. I let it go. I filed the wire receipt in my folder and I let it go. The second moment. The wedding contribution. When Jake and I got married, 4.5 years ago, a small ceremony in Austin, 63 people, total cost just under $18,000. My parents offered to contribute $4,000 toward the reception. I was genuinely touched. It wasn't the amount. Jake and I were covering the rest ourselves. It was the gesture. The acknowledgement. I told my mother how much it meant and she said warmly, "Of course, Beta, you're our daughter." 6 weeks before the wedding, my mother called to tell me they were going to need to redirect the $4,000. Daniel, she explained, needed a car. Not wanted, needed. His old one had broken down and he'd found a reliable used Honda for $7,800 and they were going to put the $4,000 toward it. But what about the wedding contribution? Yes. Sarah, you have Jake. You have your income. You'll be fine. Daniel needs this. I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment. You have Jake. You'll be fine. Daniel needs this. This is the logic of a family system that has decided, without ever saying so plainly, that one child's stability is a resource and another child's instability is a need. That my having built something meant I could afford to have it redirected. That my security was not something I had earned and protected. It was a surplus available for reallocation. I paid the $4,000 difference from my own savings account, and I did not say a word about it at the wedding because I did not want that energy anywhere near the day. Jake knew. He squeezed my hand during the reception and didn't say anything, and I loved him for it. But I filed it. I filed it in the folder, and I filed it in the part of my mind where I keep things I'm not ready to look at yet. The third moment. The announcement. This one doesn't involve money. This one is worse. 2 years ago, my parents flew to Dallas for Thanksgiving. For days, our guest room, the good towels, the whole thing. On the third day, my mother was on the phone with my aunt, my father's sister who lives in Michigan, and I was in the kitchen doing dishes, not trying to listen, just existing in my own home. And I heard my mother say, in the cheerful, proud tone she uses when she is performing our family for an audience, "Oh, Sarah takes care of everything. Whatever we need, she's always there. We're so lucky." I stood at the sink with my hands in the soapy water, and I felt something move through me that I didn't have a name for at the time. I have a name for it now. It was the feeling of being described accurately and completely wrongly at the same time. Because yes, technically I had always been there. Technically I had always taken care of things. But the way my mother said it, the warmth and the pride and the "we're so lucky," it wasn't gratitude. It was an announcement. She was telling my aunt that the system worked. That the arrangement was functioning. That the daughter who was built to carry things was still carrying them. And she said it like it was a compliment. I told Jake about all 3 of those moments that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the folder open between us. He listened to all of it. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the legal pad and looked at the number he'd written at the bottom. "Sarah," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something and I need you to really think about your answer." "Okay. Did you ever sign anything for your parents? Any document, any form, anything with your name on it that you didn't read completely?" I started to say no. And then I stopped. 'Cause there was something. There was one thing 4 years ago that my father had mailed me and asked me to sign and return. Something about a family account. Something administrative, he'd said. I had been in the middle of a brutal audit cycle at work, and I had skimmed it and signed it and mailed it back without reading it the way I would have read anything else. Without reading it the way I read things for a living. I looked at Jake. There might be something, I said. He nodded slowly, the way he does when a property comes in undervalued and he already knows what that means. Then we need to find it, he said. Tonight. Found it. And what it said was not what my father had described it as. Not even close. My parents flew into Dallas on a Friday evening in October. I had not told them about the document yet. I had not told them about the folder, or the legal pad, or the $43,000 written in Jake's handwriting at the bottom of a page I had since photographed and saved in 3 separate locations. I had not told them that Jake and I had spent the better part of 2 weeks being very quiet with each other in the specific way that means something large is being processed. I had told them what they expected to hear. That we were looking forward to seeing them, that the guest room was ready, that I was making the lamb on Saturday. This was true. I did make the lamb. I set the table with the good placemats. I bought the sparkling water my father prefers and the particular brand of biscuits my mother likes with her tea. I was, to all visible appearances, exactly the daughter they had always counted on me to be. Jake knew what I was doing. He didn't comment on it. He helped me carry in the groceries, shook my father's hand at the door, hugged my mother, and then spent the first evening being exactly as warm and present as he always was. Because Jake understood, without my having to explain it, that you do not tip your hand before you're ready to play it. We had decided together that we would let the visit happen. Let them settle in. Let them bring up the $14,000 in their own time, in their own way, which we both knew they would. Wedding and asked whether Jake's company was doing well and admired the new throw pillows in the living room. My father sat with Jake and watched college football and discussed the Dallas housing market with the polite interest of a man who is waiting for the real conversation to begin. Daniel was not there in person. He was in Chicago now. Had moved there 8 months ago for reasons that were vague and varied depending on who in the family was telling the story. He called Saturday evening and I spoke to him for 4 minutes. He asked how I was. I told him I was well. He asked about Jake. Said Jake was good. There was a pause that had a shape to it, the shape of $14,000, and then he said carefully, "Mom said she talked to you." "She did," I said. Another pause. "Cool," he said. "Okay. Talk soon." He hung up. And I stood in the hallway outside the guest room and I thought, he knows. He's already spending it in his head. He called to take the temperature and now he thinks everything is fine. I went back to the kitchen and finished the dishes. Sunday dinner was when it happened. I want to describe this scene carefully because I need you to understand the specific choreography of it. Because it wasn't accidental. It was staged. Not maliciously perhaps, but staged nonetheless. The way certain conversations are always staged by people who have learned that the dinner table is the hardest place to say no. We were seated at the dining table. 4 of us. The good china because my mother had asked if she could set the table and I had said yes. The lamb was sliced. The rice was done. The bread was warm. Everything looked from the outside like a family having a Sunday dinner. My father cleared his throat. He does this before important announcements. He has done it my entire life. It is the sound of a man who has decided something and is now issuing it. "Sarah, your mother and I wanted to talk to you both about Daniel's situation." Jake set down his fork. Not dramatically. Just set it down with intention and gave my father his full attention. "We know it's not a small amount," my father continued. "But Daniel is family. And family takes care of family. We raised you both with that value." I looked at my plate. "The $14,000. We think if you can wire it by the end of the month, that gives Daniel enough time to settle things with Khalid's family before it becomes a bigger issue. We'll handle the details on our end." I looked up. And we were thinking, my mother added, reaching over to touch my hand in that particular way she has, warm, certain, the touch of someone who has already decided the answer. You could just add it to the running total. Daniel will pay it all back eventually. When he's more settled. The running total. She said it so casually. So completely without self-consciousness. The running total. As if we had all agreed at some point that there was a ledger being kept. As if the $43,000 was a known, acknowledged, mutually understood figure that we were all just managing together. As if it had a name in our family vocabulary. I felt Jake go still beside me. Not tense. Not angry. Ill. The way a building goes still before something structural shifts. I need you to understand what that phrase did to me. The running total. Because in 3 words, my mother had accidentally confirmed everything Jake and I had been looking at in that folder for 2 weeks. She had named it. She had acknowledged its existence. She had described a system, a financial system in which I was the sole depositor and Daniel was the sole beneficiary, with the casual familiarity of someone describing a household arrangement. She didn't realize what she'd said. I did. I set my own fork down. Mom, I said. What running total? She blinked. You know what you've been helping with. Over the years. I'd like to hear you describe it. A flicker of something crossed her face. Not guilt exactly. More like the expression of someone who has stepped onto ice they expected to be solid and felt it shift slightly beneath them. Sarah, this isn't. Because from where I'm sitting, I said, keeping my voice very even, very calm, what I've been doing over the past 6 years is sending money when I was asked to. Without any formal agreement. Without repayment. Without being consulted about whether I could afford it or whether I agreed. Pause. Is that the running total you're referring to? My father's face had changed. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen him direct at me before. Not anger, not exactly, but something close to the alertness of a man who realizes the conversation has not gone the way he mapped it. My mother looked at Jake. This was a mistake. Because Jake looked back at her with the steady, unreadable expression of a man who has been doing real estate acquisitions for 11 years and has sat across the table from people trying to close deals they had no right to close. And he said, very quietly, Carol, I think Sarah is asking you a genuine question. Silence. The kind of silence that has mass. My mother withdrew her hand from mine. She picked up her fork. He set it back down. She looked at my father in the way that married people look at each other when the plan has gone sideways and they need to recalibrate. My father cleared his throat again. We didn't come here to make this into a confrontation, he said. Neither did we, I said. And I meant it. But I want to understand something. When you told Daniel I would handle his loan, did you ask him to agree to repay me? Was there any conversation about how this works? About what the terms are? Another silence. My father's jaw moved slightly. Sarah, this is family. We don't do contracts with family. And there it was. The line I had been waiting for, without knowing I was waiting for it. The line that explained every dissolved loan, every redirected contribution, every wire receipt in my folder. We don't do contracts with family. Which meant, we don't do accountability with family. Which meant, the money moves in one direction and the obligation moves in the other, and the person who is owed is expected to absorb it because that is what family does. I looked at my father for a long moment. Dad, I said. I want to talk to you about the document you mailed me 4 years ago. The fork in his hand stopped moving. What document? He said. But his eyes said something different. His eyes said she found it. And the moment he said those 2 words, what document? I knew that whatever my father had told me that paper was, it was not what it actually was. And I knew that what happened next was not going to look anything like. 4 years ago, on a Wednesday afternoon in November, a FedEx envelope arrived at our house in Frisco. I remember it specifically because I was in the middle of a compliance review cycle at work, the kind that runs 11-12 hours a day for 3 weeks straight, where you go home and eat whatever is fastest and fall asleep reading flagged transaction reports. The envelope was on the kitchen counter when I got home at 8:47 p.m. My father's return address in Naperville. My name in his precise, engineer's handwriting. I opened it standing at the counter, still in my work clothes. Inside was a 2-page document, single-spaced, dense with language that, under any other circumstance, I would have read with the careful line-by-line attention I give everything professionally. But I was exhausted, and it was my father, and he had texted me 2 days earlier to say he was sending something administrative, something related to a small savings account my grandmother had left when she passed, an account my father was consolidating, and he just needed my signature as a family member to complete the process. Administrative. Consolidating. Family member. 3 words that, together, made the document feel like paperwork. Like the kind of thing you sign at the bottom of a bank form without reading every clause because the person handing it to you is someone you trust and the context is routine and you are running on 4 hours of sleep in a granola bar. I read the first paragraph. I skimmed the second. I signed at the bottom, Sarah A. Mitchell, the way I sign things, and I slid it back into the FedEx envelope with the prepaid return label my father had included, and I put it in my bag to drop at the FedEx location on my way to work the next morning. I did not think about it again for 4 years. The night after the Sunday dinner, after my parents had gone to bed in the guest room with a particular silence of 2 people recalibrating, Jake and I sat in my home office with the door closed. I pulled up my email archive, searched my father's name, filtered by attachments. It took me 9 minutes to find a scanned copy. I had forwarded the document to myself before mailing the original back. A habit so automatic I do it without thinking, the way you back up files before editing them. Professional reflex. I downloaded it, opened it, and I read it. Really read it. The way I read flagged transaction documents at work. Slowly, without assumptions, following every clause to its conclusion before moving to the next. By the 3rd paragraph I had stopped breathing normally. By the 6th paragraph Jake, who was reading over my shoulder, put his hand on the back of my chair and said very quietly, "Sarah." Just my name. The way he says it when something is serious. The document was not what my father had described. It was not an administrative form for my grandmother's savings account consolidation. It was a limited power of attorney. Specifically, and I want to be precise here because precision is what this moment deserves. It was a limited financial power of attorney that designated me as an authorized agent for a joint family account held in both my father's name and my mother's name at a credit union in Illinois. The account I had apparently been designated to manage. The account that, according to the document, I had the authority to make disbursements from on behalf of the family. I sat with that for a moment. Then I pulled up the credit union's website. Then I called their customer service line. It was 11:23 p.m., so I left a callback request. And I opened a separate tab and started pulling every financial record I had access to for the past 4 years. Because here's what I needed to understand. If I was listed as an authorized agent on a family account, and if disbursements had been made from that account, and if those disbursements had gone to Daniel, then I needed to know whether my signature on that document had been used for anything beyond what I had been told it was for. I needed to know if my name was on transactions I had never authorized. Jake pulled his chair around to my side of the desk. We started going through it together. That was the moment everything shifted. What we found over the next 3 hours was not what I expected. It was, in some ways, both less dramatic and more clarifying than I had feared. The limited power of attorney had not been used to forge transactions or move large sums without my knowledge. I want to be clear about that because I know what that story sounds like, and this is not quite that story. What it had been used for was something subtler and, in its own way, more revealing. The account existed. It had been opened 12 years ago with a deposit of $18,000. Money from my grandmother's estate, split between my father and his 2 siblings. My father's share. His to manage. Over the past 4 years, since I had signed the document, the account had been used as a pass-through. Money came in from my father's regular income. Money went out to Daniel in amounts ranging from $400 to $3,200, at irregular intervals totaling. I ran the numbers twice, $31,000. None of that was illegal. Here is what was. 3 of those disbursements, totaling $8,400, had been processed using my authorization code. My designation as the authorized agent. My name on the disbursement records as the approving party. I had not approved them. I had not been contacted about them. I had not known they existed. My name had been used 3 times to authorize financial disbursements from an account I had been told was simply being consolidated. Disbursements I had never reviewed, never approved, and never had any knowledge of until 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday night in October when I was sitting in my home office in Frisco, with my husband reading over my shoulder and the guest room down the hall occupied by the 2 people who had done it. I sat back in my chair. Jake was very still. "Okay," I said. Not dramatically. Just, okay. The way you say it when a set of facts has arrived and you need to acknowledge them before you decide what to do with them. "Okay," Jake said back. We looked at each other. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment because I think it matters and I think some of you will recognize it. It wasn't rage. It wasn't the hot, immediate, table-flipping anger you might expect from a scene like this. What I felt was something colder and much more clarifying. It was the feeling of a fog lifting. Of a thing you have sensed for years but could never quite see suddenly coming into focus with the particular sharpness of documented fact. I had spent 6 years telling myself that my family's behavior was a dysfunction, a pattern, a dynamic. The kind of soft, psychological language we use when we want to describe something painful without having to call it what it actually is. What I was looking at now had a different kind of language. It had account numbers. It had authorization codes. It had my name on disbursement records I had never seen. It had a paper trail. The exact kind of paper trail I reconstruct for a living when my bank needs to determine whether something that looks like an accident was actually a decision. This was not a family dynamic. This was documentation. Jake spoke first. "We need to make copies of everything. Tonight. Before they wake up." "I know. And we need to talk to someone. Not tomorrow. This week." "I know. Sarah." He turned to look at me fully, the way he does when he needs me to really hear something. "You didn't do anything wrong. You signed a document you were misled about. That's not your failure. That's something else entirely." He nodded. But I was already somewhere else in my mind. Already moving forward through the sequence of what came next. Already thinking the way I think at work when a flagged transaction turns out to be part of a larger pattern. Methodically, precisely, without emotion clouding the architecture of the response. Because here is the thing about working in financial compliance for 8 years. You learn that the cover-up is almost always worse than the original act. That the moment someone uses another person's name without their knowledge, they have moved from a family problem into a legal exposure. That paper trails don't disappear because you want them to. That accounts have records and records have timestamps and timestamps don't care about family loyalty or holiday dinners or the particular warmth in someone's voice when they say who else is there. I pulled up my work laptop. I opened a new document. I started typing. Not a confrontation. Not an accusation. Not yet. Just a timeline. Clean, dated, sourced. The kind of document I would prepare for a compliance review. The kind of document that, if it ever needed to go somewhere official, would be exactly what that somewhere official needed to see. Down the hall my parents were asleep. In my office, I was building something they had not prepared for. They had spent years counting on my silence. What they hadn't counted on was what I do when I'm not silent. What I do is document. What I do is file. What I do is follow a paper trail to its absolute end. And then I decide what happens next. Monday morning. 6:15 a.m. My parents were still asleep. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when something significant is about to happen, and only one person in it knows that yet. I had slept 4 hours. Not because I was anxious, I was past anxious. I had moved through anxious sometime around 2 a.m. and come out the other side into something that felt almost like calm, but because there was work to do and the hours before anyone else woke up were the only hours that were entirely mine. I was already dressed. Coffee made. Laptop open on the kitchen counter. Jake came downstairs at 6:30, took one look at me, and poured himself a cup without saying anything. He sat across from me at the counter. I turned the laptop to face him so he could see what I'd built overnight. It was a 14-page document. A timeline, structured the way I structure compliance reports at work. Chronological, sourced, annotated. Every transfer, every request, every payment, cross-referenced with dates and amounts and the communication that preceded each one. Screenshots of texts. Copies of wire confirmations. The scanned limited power of attorney. The 3 disbursement records carrying my authorization code. A summary table at the front, the kind I include in executive reports so that whoever reads it can understand the shape of the whole thing in 60 seconds before they get into the details. At the top, in the header field where I normally write the name of the institution under review, I had typed, Mitchell Family Financial Summary, prepared by Sarah A. Mitchell, October 2024. Jake read the summary table. Then he flipped to the disbursement records. Then he looked up. "This is good," he said. "Not this is a lot or are you sure about this? Just this is good." The assessment of someone who has reviewed enough documentation in his own professional life to recognize when something has been done correctly. "I have a call at 9, I said. "With a family law attorney. Friend of a colleague, she does estate and financial matters. I reached out last night." Jake nodded. "And I called the credit union," I said. "Left a callback request. I need to understand what my actual legal exposure is as an authorized agent on that account. Whether those disbursements, the ones made in my name without my knowledge, constitute unauthorized use of my authorization. And if they do." I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug. "Then we have options," I said, "that I would like to understand fully before I decide which one to use." My parents came downstairs at 7:30. My mother made tea. My father sat at the kitchen table with his phone. The morning had the texture of a normal morning. "Good morning, did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you, the weather looks nice." The particular performance of ordinary that families put on the morning after a difficult dinner, when everyone has decided, silently and collectively, to let the previous night settle before returning to it. I was pleasant. We made eggs. I asked my mother about her flight home on Tuesday and whether she needed me to arrange a car to the airport. I was, to all visible appearances, the same daughter I had always been. Inside I was working. The attorney's name was Diane Reyes. She had been practicing family and estate law in the Dallas area for 19 years and came recommended by a colleague whose divorce settlement had been, in her words, handled with surgical precision. We spoke for 53 minutes. I was in my home office with the door closed, my 14-page document open on one screen and a notepad on the desk in front of me. I walked her through everything. The 6-year pattern of transfers. The limited power of attorney. The 3 unauthorized disbursements. The Sunday dinner and my mother's reference to the running total. Diane listened without interrupting, a quality I appreciate in both attorneys and husbands. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, let's talk about what you actually have here." What I had, she explained, operated on 2 distinct levels. The first level was civil. The unauthorized use of my authorization code on those 3 disbursements, $8,400 total, represented a potentially actionable misuse of a power of attorney. Not criminal, necessarily, depending on intent and documentation, but sufficient grounds for a formal demand letter requiring restitution. The limited POA I had signed had specific, defined parameters, and using my authorization for disbursements outside those parameters, without my knowledge or consent, was a breach of the fiduciary relationship the document established. The second level was the broader financial pattern, the $43,000 in transfers over 6 years. This, Diane explained, was more complicated to pursue formally because the transfers had been made voluntarily, by me, in response to requests. No fraud in the traditional sense. But the documentation I had, the texts, the wire confirmations, the clear record of requests framed as obligations, was exactly the kind of evidence that made a civil demand for loan repayment viable. Particularly given my mother's explicit acknowledgement, at the dinner table, of a running total. That phrase, Diane said, is useful to you. It suggests she understood these were tracked amounts. It undermines any argument that you were making gifts. I wrote that down. What do you want as an outcome? She asked. I had thought about this carefully the night before. Through the 4 hours I wasn't sleeping. I want 3 things, I said. I want the $8,400 in unauthorized disbursements returned. I want a signed acknowledgement, formal witnessed, that the remaining transfers constitute a loan, with a repayment structure. And I want my name removed from that power of attorney immediately. That's achievable, Diane said. Depending on how cooperative the other parties are. They won't be cooperative, I said. Not initially. Then we prepare for that, she said. And we start with a demand letter. The credit union called me back at 11:15. I spoke with their member services compliance officer, a detail that gave me a specific, quiet satisfaction, being the kind of person who knows exactly which department to ask for, and confirmed what I needed to confirm. The 3 disbursements had been processed using my authorization designation. The record showed my code as the approving agent. There was no secondary verification on file for those specific transactions. Meaning no callback, no secondary confirmation, no documented evidence that I had actually approved them in real time. This was important. It meant the disbursements had been processed using my standing authorization without the credit union verifying my active approval. Whether my father had submitted them directly or whether there had been some other process, the result was the same. My name was on transactions I had never seen. I asked the compliance officer to flag the account for review and to preserve all transaction records pending potential legal proceedings. She put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she confirmed the account had been flagged and the records preserved. I thanked her, hung up, and wrote the time and her name and what she had confirmed in my notepad. Then I texted Diane. Credit union has flagged the account and preserved records. Confirmed no secondary verification on the 3 disbursements. Ready to proceed with demand letter when you are. Her response came back in 6 minutes. Draft will be ready by Wednesday. Review and sign Thursday. Sending Friday. Here is the part one want you to understand. 'Cause I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, why didn't she just confront them? Why not walk into the living room and put the document on the table and say what she knew? And the answer is, because I'm not interested in a scene. I am interested in a result. There is a version of this story where I lose my composure and my parents get defensive and everyone goes home feeling like the victim and nothing changes, and 6 months later the phone rings again with another number and another need and the whole architecture reassembles itself because I broke it with emotion instead of dismantling it with documentation. That version of the story gives them the exit they need. I wasn't going to give them that exit. Damn why parents left Tuesday morning. I drove them to the airport myself. My mother hugged me at the departure's drop-off and told me the lamb had been wonderful and she was glad we'd had time together. My father shook my hand. He is not a hugger, and said to take care of myself and to give his regards to Jake. I said I would. I watched them walk through the sliding doors with their rolling luggage. I drove home. I sat down at my desk. And on Friday morning at 9:02 a.m., a formal demand letter on Diane Reyes letterhead, 19 years of practice, Dallas family and estate law, every credential listed in the header, was sent via certified mail and email to my father's personal address in Naperville, Illinois. The letter outlined, in precise legal language, 3 things. 1. The unauthorized use of Sarah A. Mitchell's power of attorney authorization on 3 specific disbursements totaling $8,400, with dates, account references, and the credit union's confirmation of missing secondary verification. 2. The documented pattern of financial transfers totaling $43,000 over 6 years, supported by wire confirmations, bank records, and written communications, and the formal reclassification of those transfers as loans based on the acknowledgement made at a dinner table in Frisco, Texas on October 13, 2024, that a running total existed. 3. A demand for 3 specific remedies: return of the $8,400, a signed loan acknowledgement for the remaining balance with a structured repayment schedule, and immediate removal of Sarah A. Mitchell's name from the limited power of attorney on the Illinois Credit Union account. Response required within 14 business days. Failure to respond would result in escalation to civil litigation and formal notification to the credit union's compliance department. I did not call my parents to warn them it was coming. I did not text Daniel. I did not post anything, say anything, or perform anything. I went to work on Friday morning, reviewed 3 flagged transaction reports, had lunch at my desk, and came home to find Jake in the backyard on the covered patio he'd built himself, reading, with 2 glasses of iced tea on the table. He looked up when I came through the door. "It went?" he asked. "It went," I said. He handed me the iced tea. We sat on the patio he built and watched the yard go gold in the late afternoon light, and neither of us said anything for a long time. The letter arrived at my parents' house in Naperville on a Monday. I know this because certified mail has tracking. I know this because I checked. And I know what happened next because the phone calls started Tuesday morning. And they were very, very different from the call that had started all of this. Damn, why father called at 8:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 8:31. Then my mother at 8:47. Then my father again at 9:02. Which was when I was walking into a compliance review meeting at work, and genuinely could not answer even if I had wanted to. By the time my lunch break came around, I had 11 missed calls between the 2 of them and 1 voicemail from my father, 3 minutes and 40 seconds long, that I listened to with my office door closed and my notepad open on the desk in front of me. His voice was controlled. Tightly, effortfully controlled. The voice of a man who is angry but who understands that anger is not the register that will get him what he wants right now. He said the letter was a misunderstanding. He said the document had been administrative, exactly as he'd described. He said the credit union situation was complicated and he would explain it if I gave him the chance. He said he was disappointed that I had gone to an attorney without speaking to him first. He said the word family 4 times in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. He did not say, "I'm sorry." He did not say, "We shouldn't have used your name." He did not say, "You were right to be upset." I wrote the time, the duration, and the word family. 4x in my notepad. Then I forwarded the voicemail to Diane M. Why mother's approach was different. I called Jake. I want to pause on that for a moment because I think it reveals something important about how the system had always worked. When direct pressure on me wasn't producing the desired result, the next move was to go around me. To find the softer entry point. To call my husband, the man she had always treated as an ally she could leverage, a reasonable person who could be counted on to talk sense into his wife. What she did not understand and had perhaps never fully understood was that Jake and I do not work that way. He answered. He was polite. He listened to her for approximately 4 minutes. I know because he told me afterward, with the precise recall he has for conversations that matter. And then he said, calmly and without any hostility whatsoever, "Carol, Sarah is handling this through her attorney. I think you should direct any questions or concerns to Diane Reyes. Her contact information is on the letter." My mother said something about how this was not how families handle things. Jake said, "I understand. Diane Reyes, the contact is on the letter." And he ended the call. When he told me that evening, I looked at him for a long moment and felt something I am not sure I have the right word for. It was not just gratitude. It was the feeling of being fully, unambiguously stood beside. Of having someone in your corner who does not negotiate your corner away. Daniel called on Wednesday. This call I did answer. Because Daniel and I needed to have a conversation that had been a long time coming, and I wanted to have it clearly, without attorneys or documents or anyone else in the room. He was not angry, which surprised me. He was something more complicated than angry. He was deflated. The particular deflation of someone who had been counting on a thing and watched it not arrive. "Sarah," he said, "what are you doing?" "I'm protecting myself," I said. Which is something I should have done a long time ago. "It's $14,000. You make good money." And there it was. The sentence that contained the entire logic of the system in 11 words. You make good money. As if my financial stability were the explanation for why I owed him something. As if having built a life were sufficient justification for having it perpetually redirected toward someone who hadn't. "Daniel," I said, "I have sent you and Mom and Dad $43,000 over the past 6 years. Did you know that?" Silence. "I didn't think you knew the number," I said. "Most people don't when money comes in pieces. Feels smaller that way. But it adds up. And I kept the records." More silence. "I'm not your emergency fund," I said. "I love you. But I am not your emergency fund. And I need you to understand that this is the last time this conversation happens." He said something then, quietly almost to himself, that I have thought. Because I had never told him I minded. Because I had paid every time without visible protest, and in the economy of our family that silence had been read as consent, as acceptance, as, and this is the word that stayed with me, not minding. I minded, I said. I minded every single time. I just didn't know how to say so until now. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes. It wasn't warm exactly, but it wasn't a war either. It was two people who grew up in the same house finally speaking to each other without the system running between them. When I hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. Then I went back to work. The 14-business-day deadline came and went. On day 16, Diane filed a formal civil claim in Cook County, my parents' jurisdiction, for recovery of the $8,400 in unauthorized disbursements. Simultaneously, she sent a second letter formally notifying the credit union's compliance department of the unauthorized use of my authorization designation and requesting a formal review. The credit union responded within 5 business days. They conducted an internal review of the 3 disbursements. They confirmed that secondary verification had not been obtained for any of them. They confirmed that my authorization code had been used without documented active approval from me. They notified my father that the account had been flagged for compliance review, and that his account privileges were under temporary restriction pending the outcome of the civil claim. My father's attorney. He had retained one by day 12, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously the letter had been received, reached out to Diane on day 18. They wanted to settle. That should have felt like victory. And it did. But not the way I expected. The settlement negotiation took 11 days. I was not in the room, Diane handled it, but I was available by phone for every decision point, and there were several. My father's attorney pushed back on the loan reclassification for the full $43,000, arguing that the transfers had been gifts made voluntarily over many years. Diane pointed to my mother's dinner table statement about the running total, which I had documented in my timeline with the date, location, and witnesses present. My father's attorney went quiet for a moment and then asked for a recess. They came back with a counter. The final settlement, signed by both my parents and witnessed formally, contained 4 elements. First, full restitution of the $8,400 in unauthorized disbursements, wired to my personal account within 10 business days of signing. Second, a signed loan acknowledgement for $28,000, A negotiated figure representing the documented transfers for which I had the clearest paper trail, with a structured repayment schedule of $500 per month beginning 60 days after signing. Third, immediate revocation of the limited power of attorney and removal of my name from the Illinois Credit Union account. Fourth, and this one was mine, specifically non-negotiable, the one I had told Diane before negotiations began that I would not move on. A written acknowledgement, signed by both my parents, that the transfers had been loans and not gifts, that I had been a financial resource for the family without adequate recognition or compensation, and that going forward, no financial commitments would be made in my name without my prior written consent. That fourth element was not legally required. But I required it. Because I needed it in writing. Not for a court. Not for an attorney. For myself. Because I had spent 6 years absorbing something that had no name and no documentation and no acknowledgement, and I needed the people who had built that system to put their names on a piece of paper that said, "We see what we did." They signed it. The $8,400 arrived in my account on a Thursday morning. I was at my desk at work when the deposit notification came through on my phone. I looked at it for a moment. Then I put my phone face down and went back to the transaction report I was reviewing. Jake texted me at lunch. "Did it come through?" I wrote back yes. He sent back a single period. Which is his version of a long exhale. I want to tell you what happened with my family after. It would be a neater story if I told you the relationship was repaired. That my parents came to understand what they had done and that we rebuilt something cleaner and more honest from the wreckage of the old dynamic. It would also be a neater story if I told you it was completely destroyed. Clean break, no contact, case closed. The truth is messier and more human than either of those. My mother calls less frequently now. When she calls, the calls are shorter and the texture is different. More careful, more aware of edges. My father does not call often, but when he does he is civil and slightly formal. The way people are when they have been on the other side of legal proceedings with someone they expected never to be on the other side of anything with. Daniel and I have spoken 4 times since the settlement. The conversations are cautious. There is something between us now that wasn't there before. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of mutual clarity. He knows I have records. He knows I know how to use them. And I think, in some part of himself he hasn't fully acknowledged yet. He knows that what I did was not a betrayal of the family. It was the first honest thing the family had done in years. The $500 monthly payments began arriving 60 days after signing, as agreed. My father has not missed one. I keep the settlement documents in the same filing cabinet as the original folder. Behind the tab that used to just say family. I have relabeled it. It now says family. Resolved, I want to tell you something I have never said in quite this way before. The $8,400 was not the point. The $28,000 repayment plan is not the point. The settlement, the attorney, the demand letter, the credit union compliance flag, the signed acknowledgement, none of it individually is the point. The point is what happened to me on the inside. Because here is what nobody tells you about being the responsible one in your family. The capable one, the one who moved away and built something and answers every call and sends money when it's needed and holds the whole informal infrastructure of everyone else's stability together with both hands while somehow also maintaining your own. Nobody tells you that you can do all of that and still feel at the end of every day like you are failing. Like you are never enough. Like the measure of your love is always the next transfer, the next yes, the next time you absorb something that should never have been yours to absorb. Nobody tells you that the system is designed to make you feel that way. That the feeling of never being enough is not a personal failing. It is a feature. It is how the system keeps running. I know some of you are listening to this right now and you recognize something in it. Maybe it's not $43,000. Maybe it's $4,000. Maybe it's not money at all, maybe it's time or energy or the particular exhaustion of being the one everyone calls when something goes wrong, the one who is always expected to have the answer and absorb the cost and never, ever say, "This is too much for me." If that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. The moment I stopped being available for the system was not the moment I stopped loving my family. It was the moment I started being honest with them. And that honesty, that clean, documented, legally witnessed honesty, did more for my relationships than 6 years of quiet compliance ever had. Because compliance is not connection. Compliance is just the price you pay to avoid the discomfort of being truly seen. I'm seen now. By Jake. By myself. And, however uncomfortably, by the people who raised me. That is worth more than any number on a legal pad. Kept that folder. The one with all the receipts. Not as a weapon. Not as insurance. Just as a reminder. Of what I was willing to absorb before I understood my own value. Of how long I carried something without naming it. Of the Tuesday morning in October when my mother said, "Who else is there?" and my husband was standing in the doorway, and something in me finally, quietly, irrevocably answered. Me. I'm here. And I choose myself. The ceiling fan still clicks overhead in the mornings. The coffee still brews at 6:47. But when my phone lights up now, I look at it differently. I pick up when I want to. I set it down when I need to. And I have not wired a single dollar to anyone who did not ask me first. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If this story stayed with you, if something in it landed in a place you recognize, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. Where are you listening from? And if you've ever been the one in your family who carries everything, tell me, what was the moment you finally put it down? 'Cause I read every comment. Every single one. And I can tell you that the ones that stay with me longest are not the ones that say good story. They're the ones that say this happened to me too. The ones that remind me that none of us are as alone in these rooms as we feel when we're standing in them. If this is your first time here, welcome. This channel is for people who have been underestimated, overlooked, and quietly exhausted by the people who were supposed to see them clearly. Every story I tell is true. Every detail is real. And every ending is chosen, not given. Subscribe if you want to hear what happens when the quiet ones finally decide to speak. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who is still in the middle of their own version of this story, still absorbing, still complying, still telling themselves it's fine, share this with them. Sometimes the most important thing someone can hear is simply, "You are allowed to choose yourself." I'll see you in the next one.